Right before we dive into this absolute shit show of family drama, most people just watch and scroll without subscribing, but I know you're not one of them, yeah? If you enjoy watching my life implode in real time, I'm counting on you. Go on, smash that subscribe button. Let's get into this car crash. When I inherited my step-grandparents' £900,000 estate, I quietly stuck it in a trust. Months later, my sister rocked up with fake documents claiming she owned the lot. "You're out by Friday." She grinned like the cat that got the cream. I just smiled and said, "You really think I'd let that happen?" What happened next absolutely destroyed their lives. And honestly, I'm not even sorry. Alright, Reddit. Strap yourselves in because this is going to be one hell of a ride through British family dysfunction at its absolute finest. I've been lurking on this sub for years, reading your stories and thinking, Christ, I wish I had something this mental to share. Well, the universe finally delivered, and bloody hell did it deliver with bells on. This happened over about 2 years, but the main carnage was concentrated in the last 8 months. I'm still processing everything that went down, and honestly, I need to get this off my chest before I completely lose the plot. Fair warning, this is going to be extremely long, but I promise it's worth reading to the very end. The payoff is absolutely mental. Names have been changed to protect the guilty, but everything else is 100% true. I've got documentation for most of it, screenshots, recordings, and my best mate was there for all the really juicy bits. This isn't some creative writing exercise. This actually happened to me, in all its glorious, messy reality. I'm Sophie, 34, female, live in Surrey and pull in £62,000 managing retail properties and office blocks. Nothing fancy, but I've got my little Honda Civic, decent flat, and a Peloton I use as an expensive clothes horse, like every other millennial. I'm the sensible one, always have been. My younger sister, Emma? Complete opposite. This girl could charm her way out of a parking ticket, then return your borrowed car 3 days later with an empty petrol tank and mysterious scrapes down the side. She bounced between jobs like she was playing employment bingo, MLM schemes 1 month, starting her own business the next. Translation: asking mom for money that would mysteriously vanish faster than free drinks at a wedding. Despite being a walking disaster, Emma was always mom's golden child. Because of course she was. After my parents' messy divorce when I was 12, Dad basically fucked off to Spain. Mom had a very specific type, men with money willing to spend it on her sob stories about being a struggling single mother. Classic, really. When I was 16, she married Derek. Now, this bloke was different. Derek owned a chain of garages around Surrey and had serious money, but he was genuinely sound. He didn't try replacing my dad or fall for Mom's manipulation tactics. Maybe he even favored me a bit, probably, because I wasn't constantly trying to tap him up for handouts like Emma. Derek taught me about investments and business while we watched Sunday football. He was the closest thing to a proper father figure I'd ever had. When he died suddenly at 58 from a heart attack, it devastated all of us. The man was an absolute legend, and losing him felt like losing the only stable adult in our chaotic family circus. Derek's parents lived in this incredible house in Virginia Water, one of those old money neighborhoods where houses start at £1.5 million. Beautiful Georgian mansion with manicured gardens, tennis court, and a garage bigger than most London flats. The house had been in Derek's family for 3 generations. After Derek died, his parents basically adopted me and Emma as their own granddaughters. But the favoritism was obvious from day one. While Emma partied every weekend and showed up maybe 3 times a year, Christmas for presents, Easter for dinner, and whenever she was skint, I was there every weekend without fail. I helped with their computer problems, fixed broken bits around the house, took them to Waitrose, and genuinely enjoyed their company. We'd sit in their conservatory while they told stories about how Derek's grandfather built the family business from nothing. Emma would charm them for a few hours, take Instagram photos at the posh house to make her life look better than it was, then disappear until her next financial crisis. Both grandparents were sharp as tacks in their 80s and definitely noticed the difference. They never said anything directly, but I could tell they appreciated having someone who actually gave a toss about them as people rather than just seeing them as walking cash machines. 2 years ago, both died within 6 months of each other. The will reading was absolutely unforgettable, like a scene from a particularly brutal episode of EastEnders. Here's where my best mate Jess becomes crucial to this story. Jess has been my partner in crime since uni. We met in our law course. She went on to become a paralegal at one of the biggest firms in London, and she's basically the sister I wish I'd had instead of Emma. She's got this incredibly dry sense of humor that makes even the worst situations somehow bearable. When I told her about the will reading, she immediately insisted on coming with me for what she called moral support and premium entertainment. Bless her. The solicitor's office was one of those intimidating places in the city with marble floors, expensive artwork, and furniture that probably cost more than I make in 6 months. Mum showed up wearing a brand new Zara dress that I'm pretty sure cost more than my monthly food budget, complete with matching shoes and a handbag that still had the price tag tucked inside. Very classy. Emma rocked up in a BMW that she claimed she was test driving for a friend, but was obviously borrowed from some poor sod with better credit than her. The elderly solicitor, who looked like he'd been handling wills since the Doomsday Book, started reading through the document in that formal monotone voice that all lawyers seem to perfect. Some small stuff first. £7,500 to their local church, for £1,000 to their longtime cleaner, Maria. Various personal items to family, friends, and distant relatives. Then he got to the main event, and the room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. To my step-granddaughter, Emma Wilson, I leave my complete collection of Royal Mint coins, Derek's golf clubs, and the sum of £20,000 to be distributed from my savings account. Emma's face lit up like she'd just won the bloody lottery. She was practically bouncing in her chair like an excited toddler, and Mum was beaming with pride like her golden child had just been accepted to Oxford. To my step-granddaughter, Sophie Wilson, I leave the remainder of my estate in its entirety, including the family home at 47, Woodland Gardens, all investment portfolios, all remaining savings accounts, the life insurance payout, and all business interests, totaling approximately £900,000. The silence in that room was absolutely deafening. Jess later told me she had to physically bite her tongue to keep from laughing out loud at the expressions on their faces, which apparently went from smug satisfaction to complete shock in about half a second. Emma was the first to speak, and her voice cracked like a teenager. Wait, what? There has to be some kind of mistake here. That can't be right. Mum's face went from shock to pure, undiluted rage in about 2 seconds flat. Her left eye started doing that twitching thing it does when she's about to completely lose her shit. This isn't right. This can't be legal. They were clearly confused or manipulated in their final years. Sophie, you need to do the right thing here and share this properly. I just sat there, honestly as gobsmacked as they were. I knew the grandparents liked me and appreciated everything I did for them, but £900,000? That's not just life-changing money. That's never have to work again if you're sensible money. That's buy a house with cash money. The solicitor continued reading, and this is where the grandparents showed just how bloody clever they really were. They'd included detailed explanations for their choices, written in their own words. Basically, they'd been watching both of us for years and made their decision based on character, responsibility, maturity, and who actually cared about them as people rather than just seeing them as human cash dispensers. The letter specifically mentioned how I'd been there for them consistently, how I'd helped with everything from computer problems to doctor appointments, how I'd spend time with them just chatting and being family. It also mentioned, in very diplomatic language, that Emma had only visited when she needed money and had shown little interest in actually building a relationship with them. Jess whispered to me, "Mate, your mum looks like she's about to spontaneously combust." She wasn't wrong. Mum was doing that thing where she gets really quiet and her left eye starts twitching rapidly, never a good sign. It usually means she's plotting something absolutely diabolical. As we left the office, Emma immediately cornered me in the car park. "Soph, you know this is completely mental, right? This isn't fair at all. We should definitely split this money. We're sisters and sisters stick together." I told her I needed time to process everything and think about the situation, but I could see the wheels turning in her head, and I could definitely see the gears spinning in Mum's head too. They were already planning something, and I knew it wasn't going to be pleasant. That evening, Jess and I went to our usual pub to talk everything over. We ordered some wine and found a quiet corner booth, and Jess got serious. Soph, you know they're going to come for you hard, right? This is way too much money for them to just accept gracefully and walk away. Your mom's probably already Googling how to contest a will, and your sister's probably calculating how much debt she can pay off with half of £900,000. She was absolutely spot on, and I knew it. I'd grown up with these people for over 30 years. I knew exactly how they operated when money was involved, and I knew they weren't going to just accept this decision like reasonable human beings. So what do? How do I protect myself? Jess grinned and pulled out her phone. We get ahead of them. I know some brilliant people at the firm who specialize in estate planning and asset protection. Let's make sure your situation is completely bulletproof before they even figure out what they want to try. The next few months were incredibly strange and tense. Mom would call me every few days, making these passive-aggressive comments about family obligations and how blood should be thicker than water. She'd hint about how the grandparents probably didn't really understand what they were doing and how it would be the Christian thing to do, to share the inheritance more equally. The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. Emma was getting increasingly desperate as time went on. She'd started some ridiculous online boutique with money she'd borrowed from Mom, but it was failing spectacularly because she knew absolutely nothing about running a business. She was terrible with customers, kept spending the money on personal stuff instead of stock, and her Instagram aesthetic looked like it was designed by a colorblind teenager. Meanwhile, Mom had been dating this bloke Craig for about 6 months, but it turned out he was married with 3 kids and had been lying to her about everything. Her whole world was falling apart piece by piece, and she was looking at my inheritance like it was her personal lottery win and the solution to all her problems. According to the terms we carefully established, my solicitor explained, think of it like putting your money in an unbreakable bank vault. They can't steal what they can't legally access, and they can't challenge what they can't prove exists in your name. We also did something else that turned out to be absolutely crucial later. We hired a professional property management company to handle the house. They installed a state-of-the-art security system, arranged for regular maintenance, and documented everything that happened on the property. The house was worth about £650,000 on its own, so we weren't taking any chances with someone trying to break in or damage it. Jess found this whole situation absolutely hilarious. Mate, you're playing 4D chess while they're playing drafts with half the pieces missing and no understanding of the rules. The breaking point came about 4 months after the will reading. Emma showed up at my flat at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, obviously agitated and rambling about how unfair everything was and how she couldn't sleep because she was so stressed about money. Proper dramatic, she was. You don't even need all that money, she said, pacing around my living room like a caged animal. You've got your job, you've got your flat, you've got your whole life sorted. I've got absolutely nothing, sophomore. My business is failing, I'm behind on everything, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I told her that wasn't my problem and that I hadn't asked for any of this to happen. I reminded her that the grandparents had made their decision based on years of watching both of us, and maybe if she'd spent more time with them instead of just showing up when she needed cash, things might have been different. That's when she got really nasty and showed her true colors. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? You think you deserve this more than I do just because you're boring and responsible. Well, this isn't over, Sophie. Not by a long shot. Family is family, and I'm going to make sure you do the right thing here. The threatening tone in her voice was unmistakable, and I knew right then that the gloves were coming off. I called Jess immediately after Emma left, even though it was nearly midnight. It's happening, I said. They're done being subtle about it. Time to lawyer up hard and get ready for war, Jess replied. And she was absolutely right. 2 weeks later, I was at the house doing some routine maintenance, checking on the heating system, testing the security cameras, making sure everything was in order. It was a beautiful Saturday morning in early spring, and I was in the garage organizing some tools when I heard the sound of multiple cars pulling up the long drive. I looked out the window and saw Mom's silver Vauxhall, followed by Emma in that borrowed BMW. Behind them was a third car I didn't recognize, some bloke in a cheap gray suit carrying a briefcase and looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else in the world. Jess had been with me that morning helping me install some additional security cameras around the property. When she saw the cars pulling up, she got this massive grin on her face like Christmas morning had come early. "Showtime, mate. You ready for this performance?" I was as ready as I'd ever be for whatever absolute madness they were planning to throw at me. They marched up to the front door like they owned the bloody place, moving in formation like some kind of dysfunctional military unit. Mom was wearing yet another brand new outfit that she obviously couldn't afford, and Emma had this incredibly smug expression on her face that made me want to slap it clean off. The bloke in the cheap suit turned out to be some bottom-tier solicitor who looked like he'd gotten his degree from the back of a cereal box, the kind of person who runs those dodgy adverts about personal injury claims and probably works out of a shared office above a chicken shop. "Sophie," Mum said, not even bothering with basic pleasantries like hello or how are you. "We need to talk right now. This whole inheritance situation has gotten completely out of hand and needs to be resolved immediately." The solicitor stepped forward and cleared his throat importantly. "Miss Wilson, I represent your mother and sister in this matter. We've discovered some very serious irregularities in the will that need to be addressed immediately through proper legal channels." I just stared at them calmly. Jess was standing behind me trying not to piss herself, laughing at the absolute audacity of the situation. "What kind of irregularities are we talking about?" I asked in the most neutral tone I could manage. Emma pulled out some official-looking papers that were obviously fake as a 3-pound note. "We had the will examined by a handwriting expert who specializes in estate fraud. Turns out the signatures were forged by someone who wanted to cheat us out of our rightful inheritance. The real will left everything to be split equally between both of us, just like it should be." The absolute brass neck of this girl was breathtaking. She was standing there on my front doorstep with obviously fake documents, trying to con me out of my inheritance with a completely straight face, like she actually believed I was stupid enough to fall for this amateur hour nonsense. "That's very interesting," I said calmly, because I had the will authenticated by 3 different handwriting experts right after it was read, plus 2 additional legal experts who specialize in estate fraud. All 5 of them confirmed it was completely legitimate and legally binding. The solicitor cleared his throat nervously and adjusted his tie, like it was strangling him. "Nevertheless, we're fully prepared to take this matter to court and fight for what's rightfully yours. However, we'd prefer to settle this matter amicably and avoid the expense and publicity of a lengthy legal battle. We're willing to accept a 50-50 split of all assets, which is more than fair considering the circumstances." Mum nodded earnestly, like she was doing me some massive favor. "It's only fair, Sophie. Families should stick together through thick and thin. This is what Derek's parents would have wanted if they'd been thinking clearly." That's when Jess stepped forward, and I could see she was absolutely loving every second of this ridiculous charade. "Hi there. I'm a paralegal with the law firm that's been handling Miss Wilson's estate matters. I think you should know that everything Miss Wilson inherited has been placed in an irrevocable trust structure for asset protection purposes. Any legal claims against the estate would need to be filed against the trust entity, not against Miss Wilson personally." The color drained from the solicitor's face like someone had pulled a plug. "Trust? What trust? Nobody mentioned anything about any trust during our research." I pulled out my phone and showed them the official documentation. The Sophie Wilson Family Trust, established 4 months ago through proper legal channels. Everything had been transferred completely. The house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolios, the life insurance payout. All of it belonged to the trust now, not to me personally. Emma looked completely confused and lost. "What the hell does that even mean? Can you explain it in normal English?" Jess's grin got even wider. "It means you can't touch any of it through normal legal channels. And if you try to file fraudulent claims against a legally established trust, that's a serious criminal offense with proper jail time attached." The solicitor was already backing toward his car like the house was on fire. "I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here. We'll need to research this further, and we'll be in touch." He practically ran to his car, and I'm pretty sure he broke several speed limits getting out of the neighborhood. But Mum and Emma weren't finished with their little performance. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Mum said, her voice dripping with venom and barely contained rage. But I know you better than anyone, Sophie. You're weak inside, and you've always been weak. You'll give in eventually, because you can't handle conflict. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, we'll see how tough you are when the whole family knows what kind of selfish, greedy cow you really are. We'll see how you like it when everyone knows the truth about how you manipulated two elderly people. That turned out to be the biggest mistake they could have possibly made. They weren't bluffing about the family situation at all. Within 1 week, I was getting phone calls and text messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, aunts, uncles, cousins from both sides of the family, all asking about the situation with the inheritance and whether the disturbing rumors they'd been hearing were actually true. Mom had launched what could only be described as a full-scale character assassination campaign against me. She was telling anyone who would listen that I had manipulated two vulnerable elderly people, that I had somehow tricked them into changing their will, that I was keeping Emma's rightful inheritance from her out of pure greed and spite. The stories she was spreading were absolutely mental. According to her version of events, I had isolated the grandparents from the rest of the family, convinced them that Emma didn't care about them, and systematically brainwashed them into leaving me everything. She painted me as this calculating, manipulative monster who had taken advantage of two confused old people. But here's the thing about launching a smear campaign against someone: you better make sure you've got your facts straight first. And Mum? Well, she'd never been particularly bothered about facts when a good story would do. Because while she was busy telling everyone what a terrible person I was quietly gathering evidence of exactly what kind of people she and Emma really were. And trust me, it was quite the collection. Because while she was busy telling everyone what a terrible person I was quietly gathering evidence of exactly what kind of people she and Emma really were. And trust me, it was quite the collection. You see, Mom had made one crucial mistake in her character assassination campaign. She'd forgotten that I actually knew these relatives too. And unlike her, I hadn't spent the last 20 years treating family gatherings like personal ATM visits or networking opportunities. So when Aunt Carol rang me up, all flustered and concerned, asking if it was true that I'd stolen Emma's inheritance, I didn't get defensive or emotional. I just calmly explained the actual situation. I told her about how I'd spent every weekend with the grandparents for years, how Emma only showed up when she needed money, and how the will had been their decision entirely. Then I did something brilliant. I offered to show her the documentation. The will, the letters the grandparents had written explaining their decision, the trust paperwork, everything. Complete transparency. Aunt Carol went quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, Sophie, now that you mention it, I do remember Emma asking to borrow money at Derek's funeral, while we were still at the bloody crematorium. And that's when I realized Mom's smear campaign was about to backfire spectacularly. Because here's the thing about family dynamics. Everyone already knew exactly who Emma was. They'd all lent her money that never got paid back. They'd all watched her show up to family events asking for handouts. They'd all seen her Instagram lifestyle that clearly didn't match her actual circumstances. Within 2 weeks, the family narrative had completely flipped. Instead of people questioning my character, they were all sharing their own Emma stories. The 500 pounds she'd borrowed from Uncle Pete and never mentioned again. The time she'd asked Cousin Sarah for money for groceries, then posted photos of herself at some expensive restaurant the same day. The Christmas, when she'd arrived empty-handed, but left with everyone else's presents. Jess was absolutely loving this development. "Nate, your mom just played herself so hard, she could teach a masterclass in self-sabotage." But Mom and Emma weren't done with their amateur dramatics yet. Oh no, they were just getting warmed up for the main event. About 6 weeks after their failed first attempt, I got a text from Emma. "Need to collect some of my things from the house. We'll be round Saturday at 2 p.m. Now, I should mention that Emma had never lived in that house. She'd visited maybe 15 times in her entire life. What things could she possibly need to collect? But I was curious to see what fresh nonsense they'd cooked up, so I told her fine, but I'd be there with my property management company to supervise. Saturday arrived, and so did Emma, but not alone. She'd brought Mum, that dodgy solicitor again, clearly a glutton for punishment, and 2 blokes I didn't recognize who looked like they'd wandered off a building site. They rolled up to the house like they were filming some low-budget heist movie, all puffed up with false confidence and clearly having rehearsed their little performance. Emma marched up to the front door like she owned the place, pulled out what appeared to be official paperwork, and announced loudly, "Right, I'm here to secure my property before you try to hide or sell anything else." I just stood there calmly while she waved these papers about like they were the bloody Magna Carta. "What exactly are those supposed to be, Emma?" "Court orders," she said smugly. "Injunctions to stop you from disposing of assets while our legal challenge is pending. You're not allowed to sell anything, move anything, or change anything about this property until this matter is resolved in court." Now, I'll give credit where it's due. These fake documents were much better quality than their first attempt. Someone had clearly put some effort into making them look official. They had fancy letterheads, proper legal language, and everything. There was just one tiny problem. "Emma," I said patiently, "these are addressed to Noah Wilson in Colorado." The color drained from her face. "What?" "These documents. They're American court orders. For someone called Noah Wilson in Colorado. Did you just download these from the internet?" The silence was absolutely deafening. Even the dodgy solicitor looked mortified. But Emma, bless her heart, decided to double down on the stupidity. "Well, it's the same principle, isn't it? The law's the law." That's when the property management company representative stepped forward, lovely woman called Patricia, who'd been watching this whole circus with barely concealed amusement. "I'm afraid that's not how legal documentation works, love. Also, I should mention that this entire conversation is being recorded by our security system, and attempting to gain entry to a property using fraudulent legal documents is actually a criminal offense." The two builder blokes immediately started backing toward their van like they'd suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. But Mum wasn't finished with her performance. She stepped forward, doing her best impression of a wronged mother seeking justice. "This is ridiculous. Sophie, you know this isn't what Derek's parents would have wanted. They loved Emma just as much as you. You're tearing this family apart with your greed." And that's when I finally lost my patience. "Mum, do you want to know what Derek's parents actually thought? Because I've got their letters. All of them. Including the ones where they talk about how disappointed they were that Emma only ever contacted them when she needed money. Including the one where they say they feel like an ATM machine rather than grandparents. Would you like me to read them out loud?" The look of panic that flashed across Mum's face was absolutely priceless. She clearly hadn't expected me to have actual documentation of the grandparents' feelings. "You're lying," Emma said, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. "They wouldn't have written anything like that." So I pulled out my phone and started reading directly from one of the letters. "We've noticed that Emma only seems to visit when she needs something. Last month she asked for money for car repairs. Then we saw on her Instagram that she'd gone on holiday to Ibiza. We feel quite hurt that she sees us as a source of funding rather than family." The silence was absolutely crushing. Even the dodgy solicitor looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock and hide. But I wasn't finished. "Oh no, I was just getting started. Here's another good one. We've decided to leave the majority of our estate to Sophie because she's the only one who treats us like actual people rather than a pension fund. She comes to see us because she enjoys our company, not because she wants something from us." Emma's face had gone completely white. "Stop it. Or how about this one? We worry about what will happen to our legacy if we leave it to Emma. Based on her track record with money and responsibility, we fear it would be gone within a year." I said stop it. Emma screamed, completely losing her composure. "Why?" I asked calmly. "These are their words, Emma. This is how they actually felt about you. This is why they made the decision they did." That's when Emma completely snapped. She lunged forward like she was going to physically attack me, screaming about how I was a manipulative bitch who'd poisoned the grandparents against her. Fortunately, Patricia stepped between us, and the security cameras caught the whole thing in glorious high definition. "Right," Patricia said firmly. "That's quite enough. I think it's time for all of you to leave. Now." The dodgy solicitor was already halfway back to his car, clearly wanting nothing more to do with this absolute shit show. The builder blokes had completely disappeared. But as they were leaving, Mum turned back to me with pure venom in her voice. "This isn't over, Sophie. You think you've won, but this isn't over. We'll see how smug you are when everyone knows what kind of person you really are." And she was right. It wasn't over. But not in the way she thought. Because what happened next was so spectacularly stupid, so brilliantly self-destructive, that I sometimes wonder if Mum and Emma were actually trying to sabotage themselves. 3 days later, I got a call from my property management company. Someone had tried to break into the house overnight. The security system had captured everything in beautiful 4K detail, and the police were very interested in having a chat with the perpetrators. Want to guess who it was? If you said Emma and one of those builder blokes, congratulations, you win absolutely nothing except the satisfaction of predicting the obvious. The footage was honestly like something out of a comedy film. Emma trying to climb through a ground floor window while this bloke kept falling off a ladder trying to disable the security cameras. The best bit was when she got stuck halfway through the window, and he had to push her arse to get her unstuck. They managed to get inside for all of about 10 minutes before the silent alarm brought the police round. Just enough time to ransack the living room looking for, well, nobody knows what they were looking for. Cash? Jewelry? Evidence that the will was fake? The police found them hiding in the garden shed like a couple of incompetent burglars from a children's book. Emma's excuse? She was collecting her belongings that she'd forgotten were in the house. When pressed about what belongings, she claimed she'd left some clothes there years ago and needed them back urgently. The police were not impressed, especially since the security footage clearly showed her trying to force open a safe in the study, a safe that definitely wouldn't contain any of her clothing unless she'd taken up wearing bearer bonds and investment certificates. Breaking and entering, criminal damage, attempted theft. The charges were piling up like a particularly disastrous game of Jenga. But the absolute best part? The cherry on top of this catastrophic Sunday? While Emma was in custody, she decided to call Mum from the police station. And because she was upset and not thinking clearly, she put it on speakerphone, in front of the investigating officers, who recorded the entire conversation, including the bit where Mum said, "I told you to be more careful. You were supposed to look for evidence that she forged the will, not get caught breaking into the bloody house." And the bit where Emma replied, "Well, how was I supposed to know they had cameras everywhere? You said it would be easy." The investigating officers were apparently struggling not to laugh out loud as they listened to Mum and Emma essentially confess to conspiracy to commit fraud, breaking and entering, and attempting to pervert the course of justice. Jess nearly choked on her wine when I told her, "Mate, your family could teach a masterclass in criminal incompetence. They're like the Chuckle brothers of white-collar crime." The trial was, well, calling it a trial is probably generous. It was more like a public humiliation with legal consequences. Emma's defense barrister looked like he'd given up on life before he even stood up to speak. How do you defend someone who's been caught on 4K security footage committing breaking and entering, then confessed to conspiracy on a recorded police phone call? The answer is you don't. You just stand there looking professional while your client destroys herself. Mum tried to play the concerned mother angle, claiming she was only trying to protect her daughter's inheritance from fraud. The judge was not having it. "Mrs. Wilson," he said in that particular tone judges use when they're about 2 seconds away from losing their patience entirely, "your daughter's inheritance was £20,000 and some golf clubs. The property she broke into is worth nearly £1 million and belonged entirely to someone else. Can you explain to the court how breaking into someone else's house was supposed to protect a £20,000 inheritance?" Mum's response was to start crying and claiming that the whole family was being torn apart by greed and manipulation. The judge's response was to sentence Emma to 18 months in prison, suspended for 2 years, 200 hours of community service, and a restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 meters of me or the property. Mum got 12 months suspended, 150 hours community service, and the same restraining order. They also had to pay all court costs, compensation for the damage to the property, and the legal fees for defending against their fraudulent will contest. Total cost to them? Just over £47,000, which, coincidentally, was more than Emma's actual inheritance would have been worth. But wait, there's more. Because while all this legal drama was playing out, something else rather interesting was happening. Remember Craig, Mom's married boyfriend who'd been lying to her about everything? Well, turns out his wife had found out about the affair. And she was a divorce barrister. A very good divorce barrister, who was not at all amused to discover that her husband had been having an affair with a woman who was simultaneously being prosecuted for fraud and breaking and entering. Craig's wife took him for absolutely everything he had. House, cars, business, pension, the lot. And because adultery was involved, she made sure it was as public and humiliating as possible. Which left Craig completely broke and homeless, desperately trying to move in with Mom. Except Mom was also broke, because she'd spent all her savings on Emma's failed business and legal fees, and was about to lose her flat because she couldn't afford the rent. It was like watching a perfect storm of stupidity and bad decisions colliding in the most spectacular way possible. The final nail in the coffin came about 6 months later. Emma, struggling to find work because of her criminal record, decided to start a new business. A life coaching business where she would help other people overcome obstacles and achieve their dreams. The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Her first promotional video, posted on Instagram, was a masterpiece of unintentional comedy. Here's Emma, sitting in what was clearly a Travelodge room, wearing a wrinkled blazer, talking about how she'd learned valuable lessons about resilience and determination, and was now ready to help others transform their lives. The comment section was absolutely brutal. Someone had clearly shared the video in local Facebook groups because it was full of people from our area who knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. Isn't this the girl who got arrested for breaking into someone's house? Imagine taking life advice from someone who thought American court documents would work in Britain. She's going to teach people how to overcome obstacles? The only obstacle she's ever overcome is a ground floor window, and she needed help with that. The video was deleted within 24 hours, but not before it had been screenshot and shared across multiple social media platforms. Emma's life coaching business lasted exactly 3 weeks before she gave up and moved to Scotland to live with some distant relative who apparently hadn't heard the whole story yet. Mum ended up having to sell everything she owned and move into a bedsit in Croydon. Last I heard, she was working at a call center selling insurance and telling anyone who would listen that she'd been the victim of a massive conspiracy involving corrupt lawyers, forged documents, and family betrayal. The best part? She still maintains that I somehow manipulated the grandparents into changing their will, despite the fact that multiple independent experts had authenticated it, and the grandparents' own letters clearly explain their reasoning. Some people, they'd rather believe in elaborate conspiracies than accept the simple truth that actions have consequences. As for me, well, I'm doing quite well. Thanks for asking. The trust has been earning solid returns. I've kept my day job because I actually enjoy it, and I've used some of the money to travel and do things I'd never have been able to afford otherwise. I also set up a small scholarship fund at the local college in Derek's parents' names, which I think they would have loved. It helps local students who want to study business or engineering but can't afford the fees. And you know what the really beautiful part is? Emma could have had a perfectly good relationship with me. She could have been part of my life, shared in my good fortune, and been genuinely welcomed into the family I'm building. All she had to do was not be a manipulative, greedy, criminal idiot. But apparently, that was asking too much. The funniest part of this whole saga? I still get Christmas cards from various family members, thanking me for finally showing Emma's true colors and apologizing for ever doubting me. Turns out everyone had their own Emma horror stories, they'd just been too polite to share them before. Cousin James told me about the time Emma had house sat for him and somehow managed to flood the bathroom, break the dishwasher, and lose his cat. The cat turned up 3 weeks later, half-starved and hiding under a neighbor's shed. Aunt Susan remembered the time Emma had offered to organize her 60th birthday party, took a 500-pound deposit, then disappeared completely. The family ended up having the party at a Harvester because it was the only place they could book at short notice. Uncle David shared his story about lending Emma his car for just a few hours and getting it back a week later with an empty petrol tank, a parking ticket, and what appeared to be someone else's underwear in the back seat. Every family gathering now includes at least one new Emma story, shared with the kind of relieved laughter you get when you finally realize you're not the crazy one after all. And the moral of this story? Well, there are several. If you're going to forge legal documents, maybe don't download them from American websites. If you're planning to break into someone's house, perhaps consider that they might have security cameras. If you're going to confess to conspiracy, try not to do it on a recorded police phone line. Character matters. The grandparents were watching, and they saw exactly who we all really were. But mostly, the moral is this. Treat people well not because of what they might leave you, but because it's the right thing to do. The inheritance was lovely, but the real treasure was having two wonderful people in my life who genuinely cared about me and wanted me to succeed. Emma lost that relationship long before she lost the money. She just never realized what she was throwing away. And that, honestly, is the saddest part of this whole ridiculous story. The end. P.S. Emma's still in Scotland, last I heard. Apparently, she's working at a garden center and telling people she's taking a break from her coaching business to reconnect with nature. The distant relative she's staying with has started locking their valuables away when she's in the house. Some things never change. P.P.S. The house is lovely, by the way. I kept it exactly as the grandparents had it because it felt right. Sometimes I sit in their conservatory with a cup of tea and tell them about my day. I think they'd be quite pleased with how everything turned out. P.P.P.S. Mum sent me a friend request on Facebook last month. I declined it. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as ash.